I'm declaring an emergency here at Robin Hood Radio, and we will switch things over and join uh, David Tereshchuk. Good morning, David.
Well, hello. It's good to be with you. Yes, I think journalism about the nation's political scene is about to go into a very deep dive into the Constitution.
I don't.
That's exactly what's coming up now. Article 1 of the Constitution, after all, is we're into the fundamentals here. Article 1 puts Congress in charge of money, and now we're about to have a presidentially declared national state of emergency in order to put that power actually in the hands of the president. So, yes, journalism from now on is going to take on this constitutionalist flavor, and thank goodness for that, because it really does need examining carefully.
You know, it's interesting. Many years ago, I don't know if you remember during our the economic downfall when Wall Street collapsed. Everything collapsed back then except for the oil companies. They were just making money hand over fist, as they always do. And I once wrote our representative and said that the president at that time should declare, which was George Bush, should declare a national emergency and freeze all oil prices and bring gas prices and oil prices. At that time, I wanted to bring them down to $1.50 an hour. $1.50 a gallon, and do it for 6 to 8 months. And my theory was that it was an emergency. We were in dire straits. It would have put money in the hands of consumers. Consumers would have spent that money going to stores and everything like that. And I was told by my congressperson that that didn't qualify as an emergency. And I sit here now and look back at the collapse of Wall Street and the fear that this country was going through and the strife and people not having homes. And I said, well, if that is an emergency right now, I look at then how can you possibly declare spending money for the wall an emergency? There's plenty of avenues the president can go through. And I think you're right. I think this is going to go into a very big constitutional debate in the courts. And I think that it'll be a long time before it's decided.
Yeah, I do remember 2008. Who doesn't? But and of course, yes, there was very little doubt in people's minds then that that was a national emergency. Yeah. At the moment, we seem to be having what's being talked about as a state of emergency, which is in fact just a political gambit to get around Congress. I do remember also much less time ago, 2014. There were, I mean, at that point, there was an attempt by the president then, who was President Obama, of course, and of course every president tries to get around Congress one way or another. It's part of the point of our constitutionally divided government. It's all about checks and balances, after all. And as I was just saying, here we have an emergency created because a president wants to get around Congress. Well, along with the criticism that Obama was coming in for his effort at that point, came in one very now rather poignant tweet. He was accused of, let me quote the tweet exactly, subverting the Constitution of the United States for his own benefit, and because he can't negotiate with Congress. Well, guess who said that? That was Mr. Trump back in 2014. Now he's obviously changed his point of view on that particular part of the Constitution.
You know, I sit here and I say to myself, there's not a person around, whether you're a progressive, a liberal, and there is a difference between a liberal and a progressive now, a conservative, a right wing, a left wing. I don't think there's many people that aren't concerned about our borders and national security. But I do think that most people, if you're going to spend money on border security, really want border security across the board at the ports of entry, not only the southern border, but the northern border. I think people want a comprehensive plan that goes with immigration with that. I think most common sense people want that. They don't want just one thing. as an
Sure.
outstanding
Well,
thing.
a comprehensive plan is not really how politics are conducted this current regime of rhetoric, mainly. The election was won, the president himself seems to believe, and he may be right, on the question of the wall. And that's become rather ill-defined, but clearly emotionally resonant rhetorical ploy. And a wall is not a comprehensive plan, as you're saying yourself right now. But weirdly enough, in these highly strained and high-strung emotional times, the concept of the very vague and uncertain concept of the wall, people don't quite know what kind of wall they want, but they know they want a wall, something definite, something substantial, something rhetorically meaningful, if nothing else. And of course, that doesn't mean that any of the real problems about the border security system as a whole are going to get dealt with at all. They're simply not.
You know, it's interesting. I sit here and I'm a person that doesn't want the wall built, but I do want portions of the wall which are in poor shape or have never worked reconstructed with the newer type of wall which was put in 10 years ago. And you know, I don't think anybody, if the president put it this way, I want $1.25 billion to fix portions of the wall and add certain portions of the wall that immigration authorities would like. I think if the president put it that way, it would fly. I really that's the whole thing I don't understand.
Well, you're dealing with rhetoric, as I say. I don't think the president thinks much more thoroughly about it than saying, "I want." He realizes he needs to maybe sort of, I mean, go back to the claim he has always made that he's a good deal maker. He'll shift his ground a little bit and talk about steel slats instead of cement and concrete. But essentially, he wants that simple rhetorical concept of a wall, and he wants it from sea to shining sea. But he wants to be able to. Well, it's the fundamental of this, of course, is that he wants to be able to claim that this rhetorical flag that he waved in the face of the electorate in 2016 is achieved. That he's a winner. That's the way the mind thinks. I think we have that pretty well demonstrated over the past 2 years.
And I think the Trump fever that has struck at the heart of this country and at the media was in full swing last night with the release of a book by the former McCabe. And he makes some dramatic statements and charges. And I think that the media, which went whole hog on this, I think it was important to report it. But it also is important to report that as of right now, he wouldn't even stand as a good witness in a trial just simply because of what of certain positions he put himself in. But once again, this story just floated to the top. And no matter what I turned on last night, that was the story they were talking about. They weren't talking about anything else. They were talking about McCabe and the 25th Amendment and all this and his book. And it kind of just disappointed me that once again media just got locked into something that they shouldn't have gotten locked into.
Well, sure. I mean, it's a sensationalism of the idea of someone walking into a meeting in the Oval Office in the White House wearing a wire. That's the kind of stuff that will go straight to the head of the news broadcasts agenda in any time. And we've had the story before, of course. That whole notion has been leaked, and people
times.
at the Justice Department seriously considering. It wasn't a sarcastic joke to use the wire on one of the people coming into the meeting with the president. At least that's what's being argued now by McCabe, and it was actually argued at the time too. It was not a sarcastic quip. These notions were being taken very seriously, and finding enough members of the cabinet to be able to enact The emergency is a different kind of emergency. The emergency provisions for replacing the president. All that was being taken seriously, and we were told about it not long after it. In some ways, McCabe is just confirming what some journalists, particularly the New York Times journalists, had already managed to get out of that very deep concern for 8 days or so after James Comey was fired as FBI director. And everyone at Justice Department was very, very concerned about what was happening. So concerned that these rather freakish, extreme measures were being seriously discussed.
And that was when?
That was when James Comey was fired in 2020.
How long ago was that? That's what I'm trying to say is we have chewed this over now. So I mean, we have panelized it, we have discussed it. Meanwhile, on the topic of border security, I
take what you mean exactly. Yes,
and what I would like to say is, some bill just got passed that has some money in it. I mean, for border security, not just a wall. So what I would like to see is somebody out there just saying, all right, well, here are the 15 things that that relate to border security in this 1100 whatever in this bill that everyone just
1.3 billion will do a lot, and there is something of a shopping list in there. If you want to go into the details of this bill, we can assume it's going to be a signed act of Congress now.
But
it will get signed, and the items are all checked off, all there to be checked off, including a reduced number of detention beds, as they're now being called, places where people can be stashed away in detention, a lower number than the White House wanted. It's all there, and there's ways of spending it. But of course, that isn't what the president wants. So he wants a way to be able to spend $8 billion. So that's why the end run around Congress has come up. I mean, it's all about that rhetorical aim of putting the concrete barrier up
here's the good
from
news.
one end of the country to the other.
Here's the good news: the Washington Post, which I can't get to right now, but it has an article that says what's actually in the what's in the 1,169-page border security bill to avert a government shutdown, and it's a list. So
it's there, yeah.
But the whole thing about and this is what I don't understand. It takes what's going to take to set some immigration policy and border security policy is going to take, and this is where I can't understand. The Republicans had a dominant hold on government with the president. They had the House, the Senate solidly on their side. They could have rewritten rules and passed things, whether I agree with them or not, and done this for many, many years. I just don't understand why it never happened.
It wasn't an emergency. Well, that might be one consideration.
Are you talking about in this administration or all along the way?
I'm talking about the first 2 years of this administration.
And what I would say, if you notice in the first 2 years of this administration with everyone running around wearing a wire, I'm not sure that because you've got so many different people in there, but the main thing that was being broadcast to everybody in the free world essentially was that this guy is a puppet of Vladimir Putin and really is a danger to civilization. So with that message, I don't know how an elected representative could come along and say, oh yeah, well here, by the way, go ahead and have whatever you want.
Because
I just don't know.
That's what the Speaker of the House and that's what the leader of the Senate are meant to do. They're meant to come up with legislation. They're meant to. And everybody knows that Donald Trump wanted a wall. It was up to them to come up with legislation that gave him a wall, no matter what he wanted. while they had the people in Congress and the Senate. It was up to them to do
Yeah,
it.
they were meant, after all to be on one side. And quite clearly, it was such a broken system of political alliances that didn't hold together. And of course they lost the House in the end, and that's how we get to be where we are. The notion of Trump ever being able to lead a united front, it was a very mistaken notion in the first place.
People haven't looked at it. Take a look at President Obama's first 2 years. Now, the Democrats weren't quite as dysfunctional as the Republicans, but the Democrats had a really good grip on government Obama's first 2 years, and to me, they only passed one significant act, which was a great act, but they did that. He went into office wanting health care. He got it in the first 2 years, thank God. Donald Trump went into office. Now, the Republicans, if I'm sitting here saying if I'm a Republican, I want to put together something that his major proposal. They just didn't do it. And the country is now going to pay the price for another 2 years of things not getting done. It's a sad story. It's a sad story.
One of those cases where the three-letter word that's so favored by the president in his tweets is appropriate. Yes, it's sad,
and I'm not,
with all the freight that word now carries.
And I'm not even blaming.
It's despicable and it's pathetic. Is what we really mean.
I'm not even blaming Trump. I'm going to leave Donald Trump out of this. This is
quite clearly not Trump's fault that nothing got through Congress.
This is what's so interesting.
If nothing's put together and proposed by Congress, that's not Trump's fault. In my opinion, he's responsible for a lot of things. He's not responsible for that.
But this is an understanding. I want to change topics, but just because of mental connection, because of what Marshall just said. No, because I would like to go to something else that's happening in the media capital of the world, or very close. And this has everything to do with people making connections or knowing how things work or are supposed to work so that you can make coherent decisions. And my thrust here, I'll pre-announce it, is, in my view, things have got to be covered more intelligently. I don't care if people have the attention span of gnats. It's got to be put out there.
We'll get to it now. What are you talking about?
You haven't guessed?
No.
I think you might be talking about the big story in my own hometown.
Bingo.
The big hometown news in New York. Amazon picking up its bat and ball and going away. So furious with Amazon being with the reaction in the end to what they thought was going to be a universally welcomed decision to bring a new warehousing facility and everything that goes with it, with Amazon fulfillment of orders in part of New York City, what's actually called Long Island City, but just across the river from Manhattan.
See,
and it's interesting that has involved a political process that has not been. I think you're right, Jill, in saying that it's not been very well reported, and what's been going on here is a very careful bit of political organization against that Amazon project for all sorts of reasons that are understandable if you do the basic reporting on them. But so much of the time it's been reported at the level of the governor of New York and the mayor of New York City shaking hands with Amazon representatives and quiet deals done behind doors. It will come as no surprise to any seasoned New Yorker that the story would have turned out to be a lot more complicated than they were being presented with. So much so that Amazon threw up its hands at the complications and has gone away.
This doesn't surprise me because one of the people behind that replaced one of the most powerful people in Congress at a young age. And even with what the governor of New York did and what the mayor of New York did was try to set up something that was signed, sealed, and delivered, as you said, and really keep everybody else out of the process. And in doing that, he set up all those other people who, people underestimate her power.
You're talking about
Alexandra
Yeah.
Ocasio-Cortez.
Okay.
Who doesn't represent the area exactly where
No.
the Amazon warehouse, a huge facility, was planning to go, but very close by. And sure, she was part of a broad front of local activists who were very concerned about it and represented their constituents who were very concerned about it too. So there's been a rather well-organized political process in place here, of which she was a very important part. You're right.
But it wasn't covered that way. But what I'm trying to...
It certainly wasn't until very late in the game when it became clear what was happening.
And that's what I'm... If things continue to be reported as... Here's what happened. These are the two sides. No one is ever going to get anywhere.
You're right. The reporting on it was horrible and also slanted. A lot of reports, probably 90% of the reports, said how terrible and horrible this was for the region and New York. And there are two sides to every story, and there's a long story that goes with this. That sooner or later, some investigative reporter will come out with a detailed report of what happened. And by the way, I'm sitting here on the sidelines saying, in my back of my mind, Amazon will be back. I don't know why. I just
in a way, Amazon has not gone away.
Yeah.
Amazon already has a foothold in another part of New York, in Staten Island, just hanging off the bottom of a little boat ride away from the bottom of Manhattan. And it will be expanding its operations there, and it needs to be in New York, and indeed this will fit into a company strategy that's become clear anyway. Already started by the fact that they didn't put their 50,000 jobs facility somewhere in a single jurisdiction. They divided it between Long Island City and New York and Virginia. They're very close to Washington. What they're going for now is greater flexibility, smaller plants in greater numbers scattered around the country to give them much more flexibility. This is no great disaster for Amazon. We shouldn't make that mistake.
Oh, it's not even close to a great disaster for them. What I'm talking about, the only disaster is the understanding of the brain cells that don't seem to connect to anything anymore except splat against a screen. And the reason that I'm saying that is because even in the presentation of the arguments against, and look, David, you lived in the city ages and for ages, and I have lived in really rank places that have then had something built in, and there's always there's always messy.
Well, there are pros and cons, of course, and of course, everything about any new construction in a settled neighborhood is always going to involve great upheaval and great passions in many different directions, and that's exactly what's been happening. It's just that many of the very real concerns weren't reported early on in any kind of serious and not greatly highlighted way either.
We need a Jimmy Breslin.
That's exactly right. You need real people.
We do.
And somebody said this about 11 years ago. The day that you stop covering local council meetings is the day that you are giving up your oversight.
We need a hard-drinking, hard-smoking, hard-working guy that runs the beat.
Who goes out and talks to people and knows what
I was going to say, what you need is hard leather.
Yeah.
That's
hard
right.
leather and shoes.
That's exactly what you need.
Yeah.
It's the beat, and that's what journalism is missing now. People
Gone.
willing to work the beat and dig up what they can dig up. And have sources and everyone's and shake the world up and let them know that what journalism is watching and you're not going to do anything behind our backs.
That's right, and that works up, not down. And the fact that it is on its head at this point is like, oh, so and so said this. Well, let me write my story off that. It just makes me want to I'm becoming violent.
It's funny. Last night I watched a special on Jimmy Breslin, and I said to myself, "Boy, wouldn't it be great if he were here today, covering this story?"
He'd be fired. He would be unemployed.
But he would.
Yeah, well,
it'd be great.
he wouldn't be he wouldn't be watching all the tweet storms,
Yeah.
and therefore he wouldn't be earning his living in today's climate. That's right.
And he'd be sexist.
You're certainly going to get no argument out of me about the importance of cultivating a beat and doing your basic journalism. Of saying what's actually going on out there, rather than sitting. Well, and this is often a question, or almost always these days, it's a question of resources, and resources do actually mean people, being, having enough people to do the job. It's as simple as that. You reduce your numbers, tie everyone to a desk watching Twitter feeds. I mean, I joke, but that's essentially
it's not a joke.
It's a factor of reduction in cash and people who you pay to do real journalistic work. What's happened now is we've all got desk bound and internet bound, and very much fewer in numbers too. And so consequently, we can't cover the subtleties of reality out in the streets.
All right. Well, we're going to see what we can all talk about next week. It keeps getting crazier and crazier out there. It really does. You just figure how much crazy can it get?
And the crazy
just wait and see.
I know.
Yeah, exactly. Stay tuned. Thank you very much, David Tereshchuk, the Media Beat.
Thank you.
And, of course, you can hear David here on Robin Hood Radio on a Friday morning and rebroadcast noontime and also on the weekends as well.